Previously on Crime Adjacent. All of the victims connected to this case have several things in common. For starters, they're all men. Tommy and the two Bobbies back in the 1990s, and then Gary Pugh on Monday. Then, they were all found in the valley, some closer to the freeway, some closer to the lake, but all more or less in the same place, within 100 yards or so of each other, and all generally near a dead-end road that had become known as a lover's lane spot. Then there was also the damage. The first three men were all knocked out and then stomped to death, left to drown in their own bodies. But this was where the similarities began to fall apart. Gary Pugh, the first victim in 2023, he was also found in the valley, yes. He had also been stomped, yes. But he had also been stabbed first. A quick, sharp, incisive wound between the vertebrae in his neck in a way that would have paralyzed him almost instantly. Then there's Margie Miller, the first known woman to fall victim to the rest stop killer. On Friday, December 15th, 2023, she was abducted from Edgewood Lane, where her car was later found abandoned. She had also been stabbed in the back of the neck, likely with the very same thin, sharp implement. Like Gary, this wound would have paralyzed her almost instantly. Then she, too, was dragged from a car and stomped. But not as bad as the first three men, or even Gary. It was like half-hearted, if that's a thing in the world of stomping. And here's the really important part. She wasn't found in the valley this time, or at least not really. I guess this was technically the valley, but the location is separated by the freeway and then about 3 miles north along a twisty 2-lane road shrouded by towering oaks. But not near the lake, or the dead-end road, or the lover's lane, or even Len's tow yard. She was found right outside Daniel Palmer's front gate, hidden from view by privacy hedges. And it was Daniel Palmer who found her. He said he was outside and heard something, a moaning. He went to investigate and he told police he knew immediately it was Margie. Who else could it be? The larger body, the striking red hair, the bald spot, it had to be her. But unlike all of the other victims, Margie Miller survived. This was an assault, not a murder. Detective Jones arrived on scene with Chief Williams and Officer Samantha Reynolds. Jones said everything about this assault seemed off. The killer had never left a body on this side of the freeway before. Why here? Why now? Jones said she had conflicting thoughts. Was someone trying to frame Daniel Palmer by leaving a victim at his doorstep? Or was Palmer trying to throw police off his trail by dumping a body on his own property? No killer in his right mind would do that, attracting an investigation to his own front door. And also, again, Margie Miller was alive. If Daniel was actually the murderer, wouldn't he have murdered her? Continued the job until it was finished instead of immediately calling 911 to bring her aid? On the one hand, serial killers don't want witnesses, duh. On the other hand, Jones said serial killers are often known to inject themselves into investigations in some way, as a way to keep tabs or derive some perverse pleasure from helping with the very tragedies they themselves created. Could keeping Margie alive, but unable to talk, she was basically in a coma immediately, be a way to exert control over this investigation and basically mess with investigators? Another thing that stood out as different from all the others was that Margie was taken just days after Gary, not 2 weeks later as happened with the original cycle of murders that occurred in the 1990s. Jones said on first glance, they thought a copycat was at work. But then, as Margie was being rolled away into an ambulance, they checked her clothes. The same token was missing. It had been cut away. Jones said later, it didn't make any sense. This scene was so different from all the others, but only the killer and us would have known about this token. At 9:01 p.m., Margie Miller was placed in an ambulance and rushed to the hospital. The same one her daughter worked as an emergency room nurse. The same one. She was working. that very night. I can only imagine the horror of being in the ER, working your shift, helping people, and in rolls your own mother, at death's doorstep, at the hands of a notorious serial killer who has reemerged after 30 years. I had just met the two of them, in their home, on their couch, with their beautiful dogs. I had heard about Margie's plan to get away, to escape Ridgewood. I heard about Molly's fear of the Palmers, and why she suspected they had something to do with all these deaths, including that of Michelle Diaz. But the strange thing is, Molly wasn't at the hospital that night. I know this for certain, because I saw her, with my own eyes, inside the Palmer house. Here's the story. But first, do you want special behind-the-scenes access to this podcast? Check out our Patreon page at patreon.com/crimeadjacent for weekly updates about the show. I'd love to connect and answer any questions you might have. From San Francisco, this is Crime Adjacent, the never-ending true crime story told weekly. I'm Chase Patrick. Richard Ramirez was 13 the first time he watched a woman undress through her bedroom window. According to the book The Nightstalker, The Life and Crimes of Richard Ramirez by Philip Carlo, Ramirez was merely walking by. At least, he claims. He didn't mean to see her. He was just doing what he always did at night, slinking through the dark streets of El Paso when everyone else was sound asleep. He was just watching, wandering. And then he saw her. Through the window, she stood in front of the mirror, naked. He didn't move. He couldn't breathe. But after that night, he also couldn't stop thinking about it. About her. About how she had no idea he was there, just outside her window, watching. Ramirez's nighttime excursions soon escalated. He soon found himself pressed against windows, his face against the cold glass, and he'd stare at the lives inside. Ordinary, everyday lives. A woman folding laundry, a teenager brushing her hair, a little boy eating dinner in front of the TV. None of them knew he was just outside, watching. He didn't hurt anyone, not then. But the seeds had been planted. Abusive home, drugs, peeping voyeuristic fantasies, a cousin who, for some ungodly reason, shared photos and stories of the horrific abuse he inflicted on people during the Vietnam War. It all began to add up, like a quiet fuse had been lit somewhere deep inside him. By the early 1980s, Ramirez had moved to Los Angeles. He was older now, and still watching, just outside windows. Police records from 1983 mention a man seen crouching in flower beds outside women's homes in Glassell Park, Monterey Park, and Pasadena. A few residents reported waking to find their windows open, windows they'd locked before bed, they were sure of it. Sometimes they heard breathing. Sometimes they found footprints in the dirt, a dark foreshadowing of what was to come, how Ramirez would be linked to so many murders. But when they called police, the man outside was always gone. But again, he kept escalating. He began to slip inside houses while families were away or asleep. He'd hide in a closet, crawl under a bed, wait for the sounds of life. He liked to hear them move, eat, breathe. He liked being close without being known. There's a term for this in forensic psychology: rehearsal fantasy. The book Serial Murderers and Their Victims by Eric Hickey examined 400 serial killers and found they usually started with peeping and voyeurism, often accompanied by violent sexual fantasies. FBI profiler Roy Hazelwood wrote about this prolific progression of early peeping to sexually violent murder. Not always, of course, but there was a, quote, dark ladder of behavior that started with this voyeurism and early fantasy that led to actual sex crimes and murder. The early peeper begins to rehearse a version of the crimes in his mind again and again until the fantasy isn't enough. The gap between imagination and action eventually shrinks. He wants more. That happened with Ramirez. His first murder is thought to have occurred in Los Angeles in the summer of 1984, but DNA later linked him to the murder of 9-year-old Mai Ling, who he lured into a basement in the Tenderloin neighborhood of San Francisco. This wasn't peeping leading to breaking in, leading to murder, more like a crime of horrible opportunity. But still, this was the moment when his fantasies and rehearsals escalated beyond control. On June 28, 1984, Ramirez climbed in through the window of an elderly woman who lived alone in L.A., Jenny Vinkow. He sexually assaulted her and stabbed her repeatedly. Through that summer and into August 1985, he would murder at least 15 people during these break-ins, terrorizing the entire state. There was a man just outside, watching from the windows, testing screens to get inside. The thing is, he wasn't alone. Joseph D'Angelo, better known as the Golden State Killer, also started as a peeper. Neighbors in the Sacramento suburbs remembered him as a prowler, a shadow in the yard. He'd sneak through gardens, flatten hedges, watch from behind fences. Before he raped people, before he murdered them, he watched. He was first called the Visalia Ransacker for the way he broke into and vandalized homes. Dennis Rader, BTK, spent months observing his targets from a distance, hiding in fields, sitting in parked cars, drawing maps, logging routines. He called them projects. They weren't people to him, but puzzles to be solved, controlled. Ted Bundy, too, admitted to spending long nights peering through windows as a teen. It was intoxicating, he said. Not the act of violence, but the act of watching. It gave him a sense of possession and control, the hallmarks of serial murderers. These men didn't just explode one day. They prepared, they practiced and rehearsed. And it always starts the same way. A figure in the bushes, a man outside a window, a presence that no one sees, until suddenly he's inside, with you. I tell you this because I have to confess, on that Friday night in 2023, on the very night Margie Miller was assaulted, I was doing the exact same thing. One of the things I learned both on the streets and then later as a force recon operator is that you have a lot of time to think, to be alone with your thoughts. In laying out there in the bushes outside of the Palmer house that night, I wondered what thin line separates these horrible men from the rest of us. Wasn't I doing the same thing here? Peeping? Of course, I had a good reason. I wasn't there for sexually motivated peeping and voyeurism. Rather, I wanted to gather intel, literally my job. Molly and the entire public record put Daniel Palmer smack dab into the middle of this case. But the Palmers, all of them, refused to talk. I was curious. I simply wanted to see him in action with my own eyes, to draw my own conclusions. But what I discovered would put this case on an entirely different trajectory. I came in low from the lakeside, slipping out of Constance's horse motel just after sunset, when the hills turned to shadow and the Blue Ridge Mountains shined purple in the gloaming. I kept to the bramble and switchgrass, skirting the poppies and milkweed as I moved along the ridges. A few jackrabbits darted from the brush. Somewhere in the distance, coyotes were beginning to celebrate the hunt. That was great cover. I stopped every now and then, pausing, just as Force Recon taught us to so many years ago. I was afraid of being followed. The Black Lincoln town cars had been everywhere. Behind Margie, behind Molly, maybe behind me. I couldn't be sure. So I stayed low and moved slow. 3 miles through the hills to the Palmer's place, trying not to think about what I'd do if I actually saw something. At this point, I wasn't sure what I was looking for, or even what I was doing. There was just something about the Palmers, a feeling deep in the gut. They were up to something, I was sure of it. And then I saw their house. If Daniel Palmer spent his life churning out anonymous stucco cookie-cutter houses and apartments up and down the West Coast, he saved every ounce of imagination for this one. Glass walls, cedar beams, a roof that pulsed green with living moss and organic vegetables. This didn't look like the rest of Ridgewood. It looked like it had been airlifted in from Napa or the cover of Western Home, which I later found out had actually done a feature on this house in the spring of 2021. I crouched behind a curtain of tall weeds on the low hills above the house, eyes locked on the living room, aglow with soft gold light. And I watched. To be honest, I felt creepy. Like I said, wasn't I doing the same thing as all those serial killers who started out just like this, in the bushes, outside looking in, watching, getting off? I couldn't help but get sidetracked. What does this say about me? Because the thing is, I was fascinated, mesmerized, not in some sexually sadistic fantasy way, far from it. More like watching a soap opera play out in real time, because something was most definitely off at the Palmer house. I had a crystal clear view of the well-appointed living room with leather couches and Navajo rugs. Inside, Daniel Palmer poured 2 drinks, bourbon, I think. One for him, one for Violet. He wore a navy suit like it was armor, pressed, starched, it was sharp, in a baby blue tie that shimmered in the light and probably paired perfectly with his crisp blue eyes and silver hair. And that damned lapel pin, I could see it catching lamplight even from outside, sparkling as if it had a heartbeat. He looked like he was preparing for a board meeting, not winding down for the night. And Violet, she was flawless, like she was getting ready for another famous Palmer fundraiser. Was that what was happening? Everything about the room was pristine, warm, curated, expensive. I wondered, how much money is in houses anyway? That's when the headlights came, and that's when I began to notice the vibe shift. A set of beams knifed through the living room and caught Daniel mid-sip. He jumped, spilling his drink. Violet spooked on the couch. They tensed, heads turned toward the outside. I turned too, shifting just enough to see a silver BMW glide up the long drive and nose toward the garage. Daniel and Violet relaxed. It was Michael, their son. He didn't slow for the security. Nearly clipping a guard before the garage swallowed him whole. No greeting, no wave. He throttled down the car and shut the door instantly behind him. And this, I reminded myself, was just hours after Michelle Diaz's body had been pulled from the banks of Lake Berryessa. Was he just getting home now, at this hour? Where had he been all day? I saw him at the press conference, but afterward? The questions were piling up fast, but I didn't have time to sort through them because a second pair of headlights cut through the night. A black SUV. Bigger, shinier, it bullied its way into the gate. Again, the Palmers jumped. Daniel smoothed his suit and adjusted his tie. Violet raised herself on the couch. They shared a glance. I wasn't sure what to make of it, but they looked nervous. I thought these were the town's heavyweights, but the Palmers, I had to admit, looked rattled. The SUV rolled to a stop on the drive and out stepped Cheryl Montrose. That explained it. The billionaire developer made the Palmers seem like small potatoes, the money behind the money. Montrose was followed by a wall of black suits, men and women both, all earpieces and silence. They moved like coordinated smoke. I remember the type, and I didn't need to be close to know they were all carrying. Daniel Palmer opened the door before she knocked. Even from my hillside hideout, I could hear the rise and fall of her voice, as if she was laying into the Palmers. I couldn't hear the words themselves, but rather the sound and tone. It was loud, demanding, and it hit me. It wasn't the Palmers pulling the strings. It wasn't the Palmers with the black Lincolns and the security goons prowling the streets and parked outside the homes of city council members. It wasn't the Palmers with so much to lose. Yes, they were big deals with scores of developments, but only along the West Coast. Montrose was everywhere. She didn't build neighborhoods, she built cities. She was rumored to be behind not just the Ridgewood development, but also the one not far away in the eastern section of Solano County, near the borders of Travis Air Force Base. The plan was for a new city built from scratch, all funded by a who's who of Silicon Valley billionaires who created a secretive group called Flannery Associates to quietly gobble up thousands of acres before they unveiled their big housing plans. This development immediately hit roadblocks as residents objected to the secrecy and lawsuits and traffic and noise and just the enormous billionaire-backed hubris of it all. Like, stand back, peasants. We know better. We'll do anything we want. You can Google this development for yourself. The volume of money behind this boondoggle is astonishing. All of the pieces suddenly made sense. It wasn't the Palmers who didn't want the same roadblocks to happen in Ridgewood as the vote on the Valley development neared. It was Montrose. At the time, on the hill, spying on the Palmers from the cover of weeds and bushes, I didn't realize Margie had been abducted. I was hiking along the ridges, making my way to the Palmer house. But soon, it would all make sense. Gary, gone. Margie, out of commission. If both of these people were out, who filled their council seats? Who controlled the vote? I'd come looking for a serial killer, but what I think I found instead was raw, unobstructed power. Would the Palmers, would Montrose, really kill off Ridgewood City Council members to get their deal through? Like the Palmers, Montrose later declined to comment for this podcast through her lawyers. Like the Palmers, they also threatened lawsuits and reprisals. But hey, I saw what I saw. She was inside their house that Friday night, clearly calling the shots in some way. There were witnesses. I didn't have time to ponder what plans they were making that night, because as the Palmers led Montrose into the living room, where she declined a drink in favor of pointing fingers, a series of shadows became noticeable in the hallway behind them. Michael Palmer appeared suddenly, opting to stay against the walls near the drink cart with its crystal bottles, probably a wise move given the tenor of the meeting. But there was someone else, someone slowly coming into view, slowly being pushed into view. Daniel Palmer Sr. Daniel's father, obviously, the guy who built upon the dried fruit empire. You can actually still buy their products in a few specialty stores around the Bay Area as they move production to nearby Dixon instead of shutting it down altogether. I couldn't help but stare. Yes, he was in a wheelchair, but he looked as sharp as ever, also with silver hair and a crisp suit for the meeting. The thought suddenly hit me. Could Daniel Palmer Sr. be the killer? It's possible, I guess, at least back in the 1990s when Daniel Palmer Sr. would have been in his early 60s. Usually serial killers don't start so late, but then again, who's to say that's when he started? Perhaps Ridgewood was just one town among many that he tormented. Maybe, but probably not. No other Bay Area town had such a rash of similar murders. This would have stood out, a killer who prowled the entire Bay, not just one small town. But the biggest mark against him was this. Daniel Palmer Sr. had a stroke in 2023, just a few months before all the killings started up in Ridgewood all over again. It couldn't possibly be him. The stroke was a bad one, practically a miracle he survived. He lost some speech and needed 24-hour care, which the Palmers could easily afford. I know this because I was looking directly at one of his medical aides, who wheeled him into the room, nodded a quiet hello at everyone, and then joined Michael Palmer against the wall as if pressing hard against it would make her disappear altogether. The Palmers and Montrose began arguing loud now, shouting, pointing fingers. Daniel Palmer Sr. violently slammed his fists on his wheelchair. Things were spinning out of control inside, but I couldn't take my eyes off the medical aide, standing with Michael Palmer as the chaos swirled around them. I was floored. Why, I wondered. Why was she there? Why was she standing next to the man who assaulted her? Why was she in the Palmer house at all? The very people she told me she thought were behind the killings. What on earth was happening at the Palmer house, and why was Molly Miller inside with them? Next time on Crime Adjacent. I'd seen enough. I crawled slowly away from the weedy hillside with a new plan in mind. I had to talk to Molly right away. I had a million questions. Didn't she hate the Palmers? Didn't she say that she and Michael had a history, a bad one? So why was she in their house, working for them, caring for the eldest Palmer, and seeming to be just another member of the family? What was going on in Ridgewood? I had no idea at the time, but I'd soon learn about the assault of Margie Miller, and then, just hours after that, the final victim would be taken. If you enjoyed these stories and want immediate access to behind-the-scenes content, sign up for free updates and bonus information at our website, crimeadjacent.com, or our Patreon page. Until next time, this is Chase Patrick from San Francisco with a reminder, stay tuned. You'll never unhear what happens next.